You're living in a city, you have way more options, and I don't think that it felt very district-like.
Whether or not ending the Department of Ed is going to sort of reinforce federalism or not, I think is up for debate. If you had got caught us both at graduation and been like, a year from now, you'll be attending an event with the Secretary of Education and recording a podcast.
The Pope's brother
Yeah,
got interviewed.
yeah.
Did you see that? People are like, he really is just some dude from Chicago. Like,
Hello, everyone. We are back for episode 16 of Washed Up, and we are here to give the Gen Z perspective on the news so that you're not reliant on the legacy media like your grandparents are.
wow, memorized. I like it. I can't believe it's already episode 16. Like, we've been doing this for 16 weeks. That's crazy to me. I feel like I say that every episode, but that's actually so insane.
Yeah, I like it because it's kind of like a little bit of a journal, I think, at this point, where it's gonna be good to look back on this and be like, what was going on in 2025? And we have sort of a record of it. I don't know. I've always, as like a journalist, that's been one of my favorite parts of it, is you kind of build up your own little record of what happened.
That was my favorite part about having and keeping like all the vistas. I really liked knowing exactly what was going on, especially in the USD community, because I feel like that was different than maybe the San Diego news or the national news or the global news. So this will be like a fun little thing about like what we cared about and stuff like that.
Yeah, and shout out to our old college paper. They just wrapped up their year, so we're really excited for them and think that they did a really good job this year.
Yay. I remember how emotional I was last year. Probably around a year ago is what I'm thinking now. I haven't like looked at any year ago memories on like Instagram, Snapchat, or social media or anything or my camera roll, but I was very emotional and I'm very proud of our staff who is still there and who will continue to be there after graduating this year.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the most like gratifying parts about working at the student paper was like knowing that it would continue on without us. And I think that that's really important for everyone to find their like niche in college and find something that is going to outlast you so that you are having some kind of an impact and not just like the typical college stuff that people get up to these days, I feel like.
I think it's a shame when people leave an org or anything like that and think to themselves, yeah, I wouldn't want this to last after me or this won't be able to survive without me. Like to your point, I think it's really important to be able to build up the next generation, grade, like whatever, to make a lasting impact on the community. Like I loved USD so much. I only ever want to see it improve at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great mentality to have about it. And so congrats to them for finishing out.
Yes.
So we actually have a pretty exciting opening today. We just got back from an event that we attended where we listened to Secretary of Education Linda McMahon. She was just giving a talk about the trajectory that the Department of Ed is on, and so we're both here to give you our thoughts about that.
Yeah, it was a really I've never been to an event like that with anyone so high up in the government. I think that the most I've seen is like the mayor, like talk. But I thought it was really interesting. She was very well spoken, which I didn't doubt going into it. Because as you guys know, I am not a big fan of Linda McMahon, mostly because I am a big fan of education, especially education that has a standard for everyone throughout the country. But we'll get into the specifics of what she said. But she was very well spoken, I'll give her that, and she knew what she was talking about. So I thought that was good. But I think that everyone in their high positions should know what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I generally think it was really great. I agreed with most of what she said. She had laid out some plans about how she planned to restructure different components of the Department of Ed. So, for example, people have raised concerns about, well, if there's no Department of Ed, which is where they're planning to go, they want to end the whole department, then like what will happen with student loans or what will happen with students with disabilities? Like, how are we going to address these needs?
Hmm.
And I thought she did a good job of laying out, like, well, student loans could be the responsibility of the Treasury, and students with disabilities can be addressed through the Health and Human Services. And she mentioned that the civil rights concerns could go through the Department of Justice. So from that standpoint, I thought it was a well articulated vision for what might happen if the education department ends.
Yeah, I think she had some good answers for what was going to happen, like you said. The student loan thing was definitely a concern that I had. I remember I feel like a couple ups back, maybe even yeah, maybe a couple ups back, I was talking about how I had issues with my student loan repayments and stuff like that. She had made specific comments about the Biden administration forgiving loans and being like, well, we can't have that because if you forgive the loans, then the students won't be responsible and you can't go around doing that. I thought that was interesting. I think that having an opportunity to be in higher education and like go to college if you'd like to should be a choice for everyone. And she mentioned that there's going to be other like programs to help you repay based off of your education path. I wasn't sure what programs because she didn't mention them and I didn't have time to do research in between the event and recording this podcast right now. But my mind went, what about the jobs that don't make enough to repay the college that costs so much more than it used to back, I don't know, in the 80s when the of Education was first um brought into play. Like jobs like that coming from like a liberal arts girly who like isn't somebody who's somebody who owes loans but isn't somebody who is going to make a fortune doing like surgery or, one of those really high paying jobs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would have liked to maybe go into a little bit more detail about the different options that would be presented going forward. So, like, um, she had mentioned like the loans would be handled through the Treasury, but other people have said that maybe we should like privatize those loans and handle it that way. Or is there going to be like a new scholarship system available where the funding that's going to be saved by cutting the Department of Ed is going to be redirected in that way? Basically, her vision for it was just that a lot of the responsibility would be returned to the states. And we had talked about how the states are kind of known to have a disparity among their ability to provide quality education to students.
Oh yeah, that's something I bring up
So,
all the time.
yeah, so what do you think about that and how, if it does become the state's responsibility to handle their own education programs, what are you afraid might happen if in that case?
Well, I'm afraid that there's not a standard for education. So, based off of where you're born, which you have no control over, you're getting a different education level than somebody else who's maybe born in a more affluent community and who has more options to do whatever they want. Something that she had said was that she wants to be able to cater the education to like the location of work because education is important for you to get a job at the end of the day, which is another thing that we'll dissect because I don't agree with that. But she had said something like New York City is different than the Midwest. Like you shouldn't have the same education, implying that you shouldn't have the same education in New York City versus the Midwest because you're not going to have the same jobs there. But to me, I thought to myself, well, why would you ever want to put people in boxes in providing these specific curriculums per location versus having a more standardized education across the country? Because if you're born, say, in like Wyoming, like what if you don't want to stay in Wyoming and your only option is is Wyoming or states nearby because you only have background in jobs specific to that area versus in somewhere like New York, you're living in a city, you have way more options, and I don't think that it felt very district like. That's what Colin and I had joked about afterwards, like the Hunger Games.
Yeah, so the idea of if education goes back to the state, then they can prepare their students to enter the workforce in their resident state. And each state is going to handle that differently. And some states, as you said, like Wyoming, are going to maybe gear their education toward like agriculture and things that people can enter into the workforce in Wyoming right out of high school if that's what they choose. And that's going to look very different in New York, where again, the demands of the entry level jobs are going to be different. The higher ed opportunities are going to be different, and how that could create like silos as opposed to I think it's pretty common for people nowadays to go out of state for education, like we both did.
Hmm.
We went from our home state to California for college, and that was sort of, I think, beneficial for both of us to get out of our bubbles and see a different way of being in life. And we had that opportunity because both of us had a solid general education
Hmm.
when we were in high school. And if the states are handling high school level and under education, and they're gearing it toward their own state's entry level job positions, then are people going to end up siloed and not able to make the leap from, let's say, Wyoming to New York if they choose?
Totally. And I think that both of us were pretty good examples of people in the crowd who could attest to that as people who went to college out of state. And like she was talking about the prioritization of like choice schools, so like private schools, charter schools, and homeschooling. I'm not opposed to any of those types of schooling. If like you want to do that, then you should. Like I I went to private school K through 12, so like and I'm very thankful for the education that I was able to get. Um, because again, that was a different standard of education than the general education within Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada at the time. So I do think it's beneficial to push people towards those things, but not everyone is able to afford it, or not everyone is able to be supported by their families or communities going through homeschool, for example, if like both parents are working and they don't have enough time to devote to their student that or their child that needs the full amount of homeschool curriculum.
Yeah, so there's an interesting like tension or dichotomy that I think we're touching on, which is people who are big advocates for states' rights and states creating their own policies take that position because they think that people should be able to move with their feet, essentially vote with your feet, move to a state. If you don't like the state that you live in, you should be able to move, a couple of states over where they have a different state policy, and that'll kind of through this process of competition amongst the states, the whole country will be able to settle on like what's the best overall policy. But it's interesting because what we just talked about with gearing education toward specific um, paths that would keep people in their state would actually prevent that competition process from taking place because you wouldn't see as many people able to move across state lines. They wouldn't be maybe prepared with like a general education that would allow them to do that. So it would kind of maybe just lead to people being stuck or trapped in whatever situation that they came up in, or that's the concern at least.
Yeah, it definitely seemed a bit contradicting to me, especially now that we're saying it out loud. Like the the dichotomy that you just brought up. I think that it is just so important to be able to have these opportunities for everyone, no matter what class you're in, no matter what state you live in. That's kind of, at least to me, like that's the point of living in the US. Like you're able to go from nothing to something because you have these resources given to you. But a system like this makes it seem to me that the people who are in more affluent areas will just keep on being like that, and the people who aren't will maybe not have that same opportunity. Um, she brought up that this is essential because like education is for making a living and for getting a job, which I actually very highly disagree with. And maybe that's just like my liberal arts education coming through, but like I do not think that the point of education is to get a job. I think it is to teach you critical thinking. I think it's to teach you how to interact with other people. I think it prepares you for the world in a way of not just in your work life, but in genuine social interactions as well. Like you're learning that in school, you're learning that um, through conversation with others, through disagreements, even through essay writing. That's how you're learning critical thinking because like you're saying, oh, this is my idea for A, and if A, then B, and then evidence for this. And I think that even translate into dialogue. So I hate the idea that education is solely for getting a job because it's also for understanding and connection and making our society function as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really well said, and I definitely don't disagree with that. Um, Yeah, you're changing my mind just right now as you're speaking about it, so I'm taking some time to process it. But I'm curious, did you agree with her general premise that education is best handled at the closest level to the student?
Yes, I did agree with that. That's something that I starred. I think that it is so important to, especially like with SPED, like special education kids. Like I know people who work as like SPED assistants and assistant teachers and stuff like that. And it is so important to give people and children the opportunity to learn at different paces. And that can only happen at the most local level. I liked when she called that out and she said like you don't want that from somebody like me. And it was like it was interesting because after the talk I was telling Colin like I had to actively remind myself like oh she's really good at delivering her little elevator pitch because I do agree with that, but I just also don't agree with the taking away of the federal government completely. Like I believe in federalism. Like I think that both the states and the federal government should be able to have a say in it, and that starts with making sure that there is some type of standardization, and from there, the states adapt that standardization, and that's like the bare minimum of what they have to do.
Yeah, I agreed that that was a good line that she tossed out. It was kind of self-deprecating, and you could tell that she is very good at that. She made a couple of quips in throughout the whole thing that got a laugh from the audience, and rightly so. And yeah, I thought that that point that she was making about it shouldn't be in the hands of bureaucrats like her, I generally agree with that, and I think like that's kind of my philosophy of economics and governing, a more libertarian philosophy where it is kind of more community based or like the lowest level of organization where you can effectively implement a policy is sort of the level that you're gonna start with. And if that's not going to work, then you take it up to the next level, like maybe a federal policy, or it should be kind of structured like local, state, federal. And what you're saying about federalism, that's kind of baked into the system is how the Constitution was written. I think it was how the founders envisioned our country working. And unfortunately, I think too often we take a more top-down approach where we tend to regulate really heavily on the federal level, and that puts up all these barriers and obstacles to the states running it how they would want. And it kind of it costs more money because a lot of times regulation is very costly, enforcing it is very costly, and sometimes it can even harm the quality depending on the situation or the state in question. So I did generally agree with her premise there. And I also wanted to mention she had brought up another one of her funny jokes or like PR moments that was pretty good was she
You're talking about the lock and key one.
yes. She talked about if the Department of Education ends, President Trump had mentioned to her that they were going to go together to the old building and put a padlock on the door as kind of like a to cap it all off kind of moment. So what did you think about that?
I thought it was like I can handle a joke, so I understand that that's a joke, but like
Well, it's a joke, but I think they are
yeah,
planning to
I
do
don't.
it.
Yeah, like it's a joke. She was like saying it with a little laugh and a little cheeky smile, but I was like, dear God, like I see it in the headlines already, especially from the left-leaning
Mhm.
news gatherers. I'm looking and thinking about like what I would title that headline, like what how I would feel about that. I think that would be a very sad day, truly. Like I do 1000% believe that education is one of the most important things to care about within the government. Like I think that's something that's very clear, especially in every episode. Somehow I feel like I'm always talking about how I'm from Vegas and how like education's really bad there. And sometimes I think it gets repetitive, but I just want everyone to know that that is something I'm passionate about and something that I am highly against the defunding of or the execution of at least.
So another thing that they mentioned was she was talking about these NAEP scores, which is like a national test that they do to, in her words, compare apples to apples. So compare one state to another state in terms of their performance on education and how their students are doing. She said that they plan to continue that testing to have an objective metric to compare the states, even beyond the Department of Education potentially ending. But part of those NAEP scores was that the states are currently performing much worse than they historically have been, I believe. Is that the
Hmm.
right interpretation of it?
Yes, I think that the report card that she was referencing was for 2024 because the 2025 is not over, so I don't think that one's ready yet. But I do remember actually, maybe it was Ezra Klein or maybe it was NPR did like a segment on these report cards back in like February, I want to say, when it was released, and I listened to that. And I remember noting that down, but like we didn't get to talk about it in our podcast. I'm sure if we had buried the lead at the time, I would have talked about it or something like that. But I was kind of more attributing that to like technology and AI more so than I don't know, 2024 being under the Biden admin at least. Like I don't know what her reference to that was. Before that, it was steadily climbing, and then 2024 um was lower than that. So I
Yeah.
didn't do any research about how or why 2024 was worse.
I think the reason she was bringing up the NAEP scores, though, was to kind of say, like, we're injecting all this money into the Department of Ed. She had cited the number $3 trillion, dollars, I think, since it began in 1980.
Hmm.
So her point was just like, if we're injecting all this money in the federal level, why aren't the test scores getting better? But I do think it's a little bit more complicated than just that. I think she has a point there, but there's certainly like you said, it would be interesting to look into the fundamentals of why did it suddenly drop off in 2024, if that was the case.
I don't think that it was right to compare that with the Department of Education because it definitely seemed like a, oh, if X happens, then take it away. Like, do you know what I'm saying? It was too cause and effect for me. Like it didn't seem backed up enough, which I think is what you were trying to say.
Mhm.
I agree with you on that point. I was wondering, like, I was wondering about the more specifics of like state communities and like I really do agree that like it is best to have it at the more local level, but how would you say that you would regulate that at every single community across the country to make sure that students everywhere are getting like the right education and still have it be that like smallest community helping out those students?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge question that I think is something that people who are promoting the end of the Department of Ed like have to actually think about and offer a plan because I think if left to its own devices, I'm not sure how it'll go, and I have concerns that some of the states that are lower um, performing or have less resources to designate might kind of fall off the wagon a little bit. I think that's why they probably implemented a national standard in the first place. So to now take that standard away, um, yeah, it could create those issues that you're alluding to. And um, I can only really speak from what I personally know. And like in the high school that I went to and grew up in, it was a little bit more of an affluent area, and so everyone was like trying to get into that school system. But as I've talked about before, I think it was episode 10, we were talking about Department of Ed, and I was talking about how that competition for everyone to get into this one particular school was in and of itself like a toxic
Right.
thing that created a pretty toxic environment at this school that I went to. And that's going to be a real issue if there are disparities among different school districts or different states where now there's going to be this big push to like my kid must go to this school, otherwise they're kind of out of luck. And it'd be so like I only know how this has been going in the last like decade or so, and that was already an issue. I'm not sure if that would be exacerbated by ending the Department of Ed or potentially helped, but my instinct is telling me it might drive more competition in education, and hopefully, I would like to see alternative schools start to emerge. So not just your run-of-the-mill public schools, which I think run of the mill is the right way to phrase it because it sometimes it feels very like industrialized and very sort of regimented and like one size fits all, and that's why I have general critique of public school systems. But like maybe we'll see more charter schools emerge, and maybe we'll see more homeschooling groups emerge, and those there's certainly criticisms of those as well, but those might be like an alternative to the mainstream public education system that now has this opportunity to rise and could be a positive development, I think.
I definitely agree with that, that the standard public school education right now, or at least the public school education that I've like grown up around or have talked to friends about, and my one of my childhood best friends, her dad is like the superintendent now in Clark County for education. Um sorry if that's wrong to I know she's listening. But if not, like he was a principal at one of the high schools, and he always had to deal with certain issues and a lot of things within the public school education that had to not do a lot with the curriculum. Like it had to do with child development and like kids getting into fights and people bringing like inappropriate gang signs on campus. Like, stuff like that that I think doesn't belong in that space. I think that like we need to be able to fix things again, like at the local, if that fixes at the local level, that would be better. Like somebody in a huge position isn't going to come to this little high school in Clark County and be like, no, like you guys aren't allowed to do this. So I think when I'm thinking about like smaller representatives, I think about that. Um, and
So
you go.
I actually have an example I think that would work kind of well to explain what you're talking about is like sometimes when there's a local issue, it might require going to the next level up. And so while I would like to see it all handled like as locally as possible, for example, the high school I went to had an issue with a high suicide rate among the teenagers, and this was a kind of recurring issue where going back a couple of decades, multiple people had died that way, students under 18, and people were like, "What can we do to fix this?" I don't really know what the solution is. It's not like an obvious fix where, the school implements a policy and this doesn't happen again. But what actually ended up happening was a bunch of people in the community were really fed up with this pattern that was happening, and they ended up going to the state and lobbying at a school board meeting to get more funding for mental health resources in the school, such as I think they were able to get another psychologist or at least like a floating psychologist to come around to different schools in the district. And so that's an example of like a local issue that was kind of happening in this school district of mine, and they were able to, through community advocacy, bring it up to the state level and implement a state level solution that I think has been beneficial as far as I can tell.
hmm My, I think that's awesome. My concern is if so many local communities are having this issue at the same time, not specifically like something like maybe suicide rates or depression, but just, any issues that might arise from not having a certain, I guess, federal standard.
Mhm.
I'm wondering how how long that would take to solve with so many different high schools and so many different communities if that is the choice of, like either the states or the districts or whatever, however they're going to divide it in terms of them deciding their curriculum. And I think that
Yeah.
is another issue that I have with just leaving it up to the states.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, so Linda McMahon at this event threw out the word federalism, and we were both saying after the fact, like, true federalism is a both and. It's like
Mhm.
you have to have the federal and the state in order for there to be that dichotomy, in order for there to be um, the option to implement policies from either side. So, like, true federalism wouldn't just be only states' rights or only federal government. It would be the kind of dialogue that has to happen to actually create effective change by having two separate, distinct levels. So, whether or not ending the Department of Ed is going to sort of reinforce federalism or not, I think is up for debate. We kind of walked away a little bit skeptical about it because just thinking to ourselves, like, well, true federalism would be having distinct policy happening on both levels simultaneously.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny when she made a little federalism joke because I was like, "Girl, do you know what that is?" Like like leaving it up to only the states is not federalism, like you said. It's both. Um, but
I guess
yeah.
in her defense, she was saying that that the policies that the Department of Ed has been handling would just go to different agencies and departments. So it'd still have federal policy, it
Hmm.
just wouldn't be under that umbrella of like education by name. But I think you make a valid point as well of like, yeah, federalism, two levels, both equally in communication.
Yeah, and ideally that is what I want. Both levels equally in communication, working to make sure that education is good for our youth because that is the foundation of democracy. And they actually even said that in the talk. Like she was talking about how much she cares about um the foundation of democracy being education, and she said that her and Trump have had a conversation about that and how much Trump cares about education. And I was like,
She
that's
said that Trump also cares a lot about charter schools, which is
that
interesting.
was interesting to me too.
Yeah, and I don't have much of an opinion about it, but it kind of tracks, like it makes sense. He seems like he would be, well, he's very pro-family by he declares himself to be very pro-family, and so from that standpoint, it makes sense where he would want them to have the choice or the freedom. And this is where I think he aligns with libertarianism because he wants people to have the options open to them so they can make what they feel is the best decision.
Hmm.
So fundamentally, I think I agree with that platform. But as we've been going back and forth, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of nuances here. There's a lot of areas where, like, even I thought that I was in full agreement, and now I'm kind of rethinking some of it. So, anyway, was there anything else just brought up generally that comes to mind that you thought was interesting from like what she said or this event?
Um, no, I think we covered for the most part everything that I thought that was relevant.
Oh,
Um,
I actually had one more
oh
thing.
yeah, you go, you
So,
go.
what did you, well, I'll toss it to you. What
Okay.
did you think about one of the reporters there asked her about policies towards higher ed?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can't believe we didn't talk about this.
And so, particularly, Linda McMahon was talking about the Trump admin's approach to Columbia University and
Hmm.
how a lot of the stuff that they've been doing with like withholding funding from higher ed is being done because of the way that they feel that these elite institutions mishandled enforcing enforcing policies to prevent anti-Semitism on campus. And Trump ran on this platform of like, we can't allow this to happen on our campuses. So therefore, when you elect me, I'm gonna crack down on all of it. And he, you know, thought that that was gonna be like land with people and be very popular, which it apparently was because he was elected on it. And so she gave some background into she had met with the president of Columbia University and talked about like why are you guys having such a problem on your campus with supposed anti-Semitism and violence, and she said that Trump was asking why is there so much hate on these university campuses. So I just thought that that was interesting as a point of conversation that arose.
I thought that was interesting too. I didn't think that Linda McMahon answered it well enough. I don't think she answered any of the questions during the Q&A personally. It was more just like a acknowledge and divert type of situation for almost all the questions. But that was a really good question from the person. I actually remembered it. It was a reporter from Sinclair. And yeah, I think that that is interesting that she talked about that conversation that Trump had with, or did she have it with the Columbia president?
I think she met with the
She met
yeah,
with the Columbia
yeah.
president. I haven't done particularly as much research about the issues with the Ivy League schools and this situation, but it makes sense to me that higher education institutions are pushing back on something like this because like you'll often see like people who are passionate most about academia come from like highest educations, which is also unfortunate to me. Like that's why I think that like education is about more than just getting a job. Like I think you should be well-rounded in everything so that everyone has the most equal opportunity to be able to have a place to have this conversation.
Yeah, and but we've been tracking everything that's happened on Columbia's campus since last year. It was about a year ago where we were writing, an edition of our paper on it. We had an article about like the protests happening and whatnot, and it does seem like there is anti-Semitism going on. And to what extent, I'm not like I think you'd kind of have to go and check it out yourself to fully have a grasp on it. But what I thought was interesting was she did address how people have been critical of the Trump admin withholding funds from higher ed because they say that it infringes on free speech. And as people who listen to this show know, like Abby and I are very much about free speech, and we've expressed similar concerns when it comes to, for instance, Mahmoud Khalil being deported,
It's a good connection.
and how we thought that that would have this chilling effect on other people's free speech because it would make an example out of him and say, like, if you step out of line, this is what's going to happen to you potentially. But she was not addressing it on a free speech level at all, really. She was saying, like, well, isn't it a violation of the civil right
Yeah, she
of,
didn't even address free speech.
well, but she kind of did because she said, isn't this a violation of the civil rights of the Jewish students at Columbia who are there to get an education and paying tuition and all of this? So it didn't address the free speech concern, but it was an interesting insight into, I think, how the admin is viewing that situation.
Hmm.
And I don't agree with it because to me, the free speech thing is extremely important. I mean, it's free speech is a civil right, but all civil rights are very important, and it raises an interesting question of like when civil rights potentially conflict, how do you handle that as a governing body, whether it be the institution or the federal government?
That is an interesting question. I think the boundary or like the line for when to interfere in terms of civil rights is coming up like a lot nowadays in like a bunch of different sectors too. Um, like I know that we talk about it with like education and then there's like abortion and body regulation and I don't know. I think it comes up in almost everything that we talk about in terms of when to interfere, why to interfere. Is this an issue of safety or is it like it's discrimination? Those questions along the questions along those lines.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all of that should be investigated and looked into, and they've done a pretty thorough job, I think, of like I remember when Elise Stefanik was questioning all of the university presidents and asking them like, why is this happening on your campuses? And they were saying like we can't take action unless it crosses into violence or like threats of violence. That was the university policy last year, and I think some of the universities have really had to rethink that, like to what extent might threats or slogans or, you know, words that could be interpreted as hateful or anti-Semitic, like affect someone's ability to get an education. Then that's really an open question right now that we as a society are have not really solved. It's time, if we want, we can do bury the lead. I'll set our little 5 minutes here. And Abby, you can take it away
Yes,
first.
I bury the lead this week. Okay, so this week I am going to talk about how I do not think that you need to know what you want to do going into school, going to college, even even graduating college. I truly do not think you need to know what to do. Post grad, you do not need to know what you need to do. And when I'm saying this, I mean it in terms of like, you don't need to have an A, B, C, D career plan that's gonna last you until you're 80 and like you have a family and you're retired and you have a mortgage. I think that is a very old school way of thinking. And I guess this kind of ties into what I was talking about last week on the Bury the Lead. And also what I'm talking about, like when I was saying how I don't believe that education only leads to a job because I don't think that's true. I think that some of the most important lessons I've ever learned are between graduation and now. And it's because if you told me I was going to be doing the job that I'm doing right now when I was freaking 18 deciding my major, I would have been like, why? Like, why does she want to do that? Like, what is she doing in DC that's pointless? And I think that's the importance of being able to go into the real world and into life without a plan. And I know that I'm saying this in this way and it could come off as kind of privileged because I do agree that like you do have to have some type of foundation for support. But I'm saying this in a sense of I don't think you should feel the pressure to need to do something right after graduation because you have your whole life ahead of you. Like if you majored in say like pre-law, whatever, for 4 years and you don't want to go to law school right away, then don't. Like you have free will, and I think that is something that you so often forget when you've been stuck in the cycle of school for K through 12, and then if you go to school beyond K through 12, so like your undergrad or your master's or whatever, you make this assumption that you need to have a routine plan, but I don't think that's necessary, and I almost think that it challenges you and grows your strength, grit, and scrappiness even more if you don't have a plan. And if you do have a plan, I'm not saying to throw it out the window because I think that having a plan is amazing. And even if you have a plan like right after high school, I just think that people are allowed and should have the fluidity to change their plan and adapt at any given time without shame, pressure, or um, any outside influence.
Great. Okay. We'll hopefully get to address that on the other side, but I'm going to be talking about this strange rise in Christian nationalism that I feel like is happening, and maybe touch on some like indicators that I've been seeing about this trend, some concerns that I have about it. But essentially, Christian nationalism, if I had to define it, I think is essentially this idea of like our national identity as Americans or as like Western civilization is fundamentally rooted in a Christian ethos, or like the ideas of the Bible were really integral to the development of our culture and society as we know it. And people can get very defensive and say like, well, because of the emphasis that Christianity played in founding America or founding the West, quote unquote, like we must defend it and not allow anything that we see as antithetical into our sphere. And so it's kind of this strange trend where I feel like people are kind of doubling down. It feels like it's a bit of a reversion or a regression, honestly, to this very like literal minded form of Christianity that is tied to national identity somehow. And there's all kinds of weird flavors of it out there on the internet in particular. There's been a lot of like people have been commenting even on our videos like Christ is King, which I think is some weird like coded like the phrase Christ is King on its face doesn't really mean anything. Like it means that people are, followers of Jesus maybe, but there's like an underlying hidden message that people have been writing about in like the psychology field, talking about how people are using this as a slogan to indicate like their own Christian nationalism. And so that's been a concerning thing to me, even to see it on commented on our videos, but also yeah, I don't know. I think that so the new pope who was just chosen, I saw a video saying that he was kind of chosen because he might be a bulwark against Christian nationalism, particularly in the United States, because he represents a Catholic perspective, and a lot of the Christian nationalism tends to come from different Protestant sects around the country, and essentially how the Vatican might be aware of this rise that is happening, and they think that he'll be the best position to um, oppose it because he's an American himself, but he's obviously not a Christian nationalist in the sense that I'm speaking about.
We're back from our Bury the Leads, and I think that you did a really good job talking about that topic in 2.5 minutes, whereas I don't think I could talk about something like that in that short amount of time because I do agree with you. Like I think that all the points you raised are really good, and I liked how you brought up the Pope near the end because on text, Colin and I were both talking about the Pope a little bit, and I do like him. I do like him, I think. I'll say that tentatively.
Yeah, no, it is a tough subject to cover in 2.5, and so uh, I'll hopefully touch on it again down the line. But as for right now, just saying like why is this trend potentially even happening? I think it's a loss of faith in institutions spurred by COVID, a crisis of meaning that's been created by really rapidly advancing technology, and people feel like kind of a sense of unsettledness and feeling lost in the world. And so there's like a safety, I think, in there's a safety that can be found in both Christianity because it's very community oriented oftentimes. And so like joining up with a group or a belief system can be reassuring sometimes. And then also nationalism, it's kind of the same deal. Like I think safety in a tradition that spans, much longer than you, and that can be a reassuring thing, but it can also be a damaging thing if it kind of puts people's blinders up and then suddenly now they're not open to anything that deviates from that viewpoint. And unfortunately, I do think that when I said that it's almost like it's a regression on some people's part into Christian nationalism, um, that's maybe why I don't know. You'd have to do much more study onto why this trend is suddenly kind of a resurgence is occurring, but I've definitely noted it on the internet, just in my own personal experiences, and it's being noted currently by the psychology field.
Hmm. I I think that that's really great point, and I love when you bring up like psychology into things because I know that was your major and you know a lot more about that than I do, and I like when it crosses paths with like journalism and people and like communication, which is like obviously everything that we both did together and like with this podcast. What do you think about the Pope?
Well, I've been liking him so far. Just what I've kind of gleaned, a lot of it from Instagram and the explore page there, which is a rabbit hole. But so he created an Instagram and he got a huge following really rapidly, and so I think he's got popular support. It seems like, and as I said, I think he could be an effective bulwark against certain undercurrents in the United States because he understands the United States, comes from it, and that's his worldview as well, even if he doesn't share in like, all the stuff that we just discussed. Um, but interestingly, I was just reading from Vatican News
Mhm,
that they were comparing the parallels between this new Pope Leo the 14th and the last Pope Leo, who was during the Industrial Revolution.
mhm,
And they're saying that maybe indicating like you chose this name because we're in a new inflection point where AI is emerging and it's going to change up the workforce and culture and society in so many ways that it was an appropriate choice to choose Leo for that reason.
mhm. Yeah, I've got to look into that because I've kind of been seeing a lot of what the Pope has been making in terms of headlines, and I don't know if you're like on this side of social media, but like a bunch of people are the Pope's brother got interviewed.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
they're everywhere. They're all
People
over.
are making so many moves about it, and people are like, he really is just some dude from Chicago. Like, I think that I love when people are humanized. Like, I think that's really awesome, and funny. So I like that connection as well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think we'll start to see in terms of like his actual direction that he's gonna take the whole Catholic Church. I'm still on the edge of my seat about it because it is gonna be an important um, time, I think, for him to make substantive change or just keep it going how it's been. So, but to your point about but you're bury the lead, I thought it was also really timely because the students are just graduating
I
now
know.
from
Happy graduation to our USD people. I know it's in like 10 days. Anyways, keep
yeah,
going.
so that's a really exciting time, but it's also terrifying. And I can remember a year ago kind of feeling like I felt like I was gonna fall off a cliff.
Hmm.
Like, I was just gonna graduate, and then what was on the other side of it, it was really hard to imagine. And so I tried to kind of structure it so that I would have things to do beyond graduation day, where it would keep me going, into the summer. And but eventually I did kind of hit like a stall in the early summer months where I was like, what now? And it took me about 3 months to like secure and lock down the job that I have now. And now things are like much smoother sailing because I know sort of the general trajectory I'm on. But I remember that feeling of panic of like you fall off a cliff and other people around you have stuff lined up already. Why don't you? And you know, that creates all these complicated emotions.
Totally. And like that's kind of what I was more so aiming at. Not so much like don't have a plan, but more so like it's okay if you don't and it's okay if it changes. And I think it makes you stronger and better in the real world because of that. Because you are like I think that you scramble, especially the people if you have maybe less support. I would assume that you're even scrambling even more because you're kind of like, oh shit, like now that I'm done with my school and like everything, like what do I do? And I'm sure that it's even more different when you graduate high school and like aren't doing anything, or not doing anything. I mean like graduate high school and not have just higher education to keep going or like trade school or like a plan. Like I'm just saying that we're so young and it's okay, is my general consensus. And if you're freaking out, if you're a junior freaking out, like you don't. Like you're so fine. And and maybe that seems so gross coming from somebody who's like, I know I've been there because I know like a year ago I was like, yeah, girl, shut up. Like I get it. You've been through it. But like it's just true. Like you're gonna be okay and I believe in you.
I would say just the only counter that I would throw in is that I think everyone will be okay, especially all the graduating people that we know personally, but
Yeah.
the people who will not be okay are probably the people who treat college as like this period of protracted adolescence. Like I think that's a real thing, and people kind of just go and like party, have a good time, and that's all that they're there for. And those people, like, thoughts and prayers to them because I don't know. I mean, there's a couple people that I can even think of who like really just dropped off, and I have not seen or heard anything since graduation. And I
Hmm.
do think there is a possible pit to fall into because I've seen a couple of people fall in it, and I've, you know, as long as you're aiming up though, I think you'll be fine. And I think
Yeah.
that's the people we're speaking to. So
Yeah, that is the people I'm speaking to. If you're working at something, if you believe that you have a dream or goal, like you shouldn't be stressed if you're not accomplishing that the minute after you graduate is also another thing I want to throw out
yeah.
because you're gonna be okay and you're gonna get there. If you're working hard at it. Just like us with this podcast. We will be on the map this summer.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you had got caught us both at graduation and been like, a year from now you'll be attending an event with the Secretary of Education and recording a podcast, like it would have made sense. I would have been like, okay, yeah,
I'd be like, oh my
that kind of
God.
tracks. But like I don't know, there's so many things that happen in a year even out from graduation you'll never anticipate. You just really gotta go with it and like trust.
A year is so much time. A month is so much time.
Yeah.
Freaking 2 weeks is so much time. Like, literally 2 weeks before I started my new job that I have right now, I was working my old job, had no idea what I was gonna do, no idea that I was gonna move to DC, and like now here I am. Like, things happen and time doesn't matter. Um, in conclusion, I think I'm done for the week. What about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I think your opportunities to pivot post college are much greater. You can take bigger risks and get bigger payoffs and rewards because you're not like for 4 years in college, you're only focused on I
Hmm.
just gotta get a degree, just gotta get a degree, and then you get it, and then it's a big question mark. But once your whole life becomes a question mark, you can kind of make of it whatever you want, for better or worse.
And it's so beautiful and lonely and wonderful and sad and laughter and it's just everything. Like it's everything. And I guess it's just like real life now, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just everything all
Just
at
us
once.
and Linda McMahon.
Yeah. Okay. Time to do our little,
That's all I got
yeah.
for this week.
Okay.
Washed
Washed
up
up out.
out.
I hope that that was motivating to anybody who is listening. Done. Okay, I'll stop recording.